What's this extraordinary place?
Well, I'm not quite sure, dear boy, but it's somewhat familiar.
It looks dead boring to me. Come on.
No, wait, child, wait.
Why?
Well, I don't like the feel of this place any more than you do, but we have to face up to it. You know, I think I was meant to come here.
Hey, look. That's Dudley Simpson.
What is?
Here, on this screen. That's Dudley composing some music.
I believe I now know where we are.
Oh, yes. Ambassadors of Death. One of his best.
Turn around, both of you, this instant. We're now in the world of the Colonial Pianist, and that screen is hypnotic. He's trying to dominate your mind.
Who's the Colonial Pianist?
He's an elemental force outside the normal boundaries of British fandom, creating captivating musical videos which turn people into his followers. Whatever you do, neither of you must look at that screen. It's a trap.
What a spoilsport you are, Richard. They like my YouTube channel.
You! I might have guessed.
You did guess. I've been waiting for you a long time. It's been a few weeks since the last episode.
Colonial Pianist, you will kindly cease this practical joking and let us all go at once.
Can we drop the colonial, please? That is a derogatory reminder that several weeks ago, my domain was a British colony.
Oh, that's not why I call you colonial.
Isn't it?
No, it's because you're full of poo.
Gross.
Colonial. Hold on. I wonder if it's because you connect ideas together.
That'll do. But now I've established it, we'll not use the term again during this sketch.
Here, you've just broken the fourth wall.
It's hardly scratched. And they're bringing these sets down at 10 p.m. anyway.
If we could return our attentions to me, I'm bored. I love to play duets, but there's no one here to play with. The beings who watch my channel are listeners. But we shall play endless music together.
And which Simpson masterpiece do you have in mind?
Richard shall play the Master's theme on the kazoo.
But there's nothing much to it.
This is the tri-note game. You have 3 musical notes to play. That is the exact number. If you make a single mistake, you lose.
And if he accomplishes it?
Then you're perfectly free to go. But if you fail, Richard, you and your 2 companions will be imprisoned in a bunker forever, forced to review pairs of stories.
Pretty much as usual, then.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed. In that case, the sketch, to make Something Who. Hello, I'm Richard, and we're back with Something Who podcast, episode 99. And this time we're looking at 2 stories involving that inveterate games player, the Toymaker, Celestial or otherwise. Initially, we'll look at First Doctor story, The Celestial Toymaker, from Season 3, and later we'll examine 14th and 15th Doctor adventure, The Giggle, from the 60th anniversary specials. And with me to decide whether these stories are a titanic struggle or a complete mismatch is a fantastic panel, starting with science and astronomy writer Giles. Hello, Giles.
Hello. Number 99. Does that mean I can have an ice cream?
If you could. If you catch the ice cream van.
Yeah, chance will be a fine thing.
And making another trip to the Something Who bunker, it's fandom's own musical maestro and Dudley Simpson aficionado, Jess Jurkovic.
Well, hello there. So glad to be back with you all.
Very good. And back once again is the multi-talented 3D artist, writer, researcher, podcaster and co-creator of Dalek 63 to 88. It's Gav Richard.
Hello.
Hey up.
Hi.
Hey up indeed, yeah.
I didn't add and background artist or whatever we're describing that.
Yes. We've been watching your exploits.
I can appear as a blur in the background of any production at a moment's notice.
Wow.
Splendid. Okay, well, look, let's kick off then with The Celestial Toymaker, which was written by Brian Hales and I guess Donald Tosh and Jerry Davis and perhaps one or two others, and directed by Bill Sellers of All Creatures Great and Small and Triangle fame. I mean, all of that was still to come when he did this. Broadcast in April 1966. I mean, you know what I normally say, which is that I, watched it on original broadcast. Well, that was about 18 months before I was born, so that wasn't going to happen. Actually, the first time I watched it was this week. I mean, obviously, I've seen the extant episode 4. It was on Lost in Time.
Yes.
But aside from that, I've never watched it until this week when I watched the animation. And then I watched the reconstruction as well to give me two different perspectives on it. And I'm glad I watched both of them because they gave me very different feelings about the story, which we might get into at some point. Mm-hmm. And aside from all of that, really the only other connection I had with it was that Doctor Who Weekly, issue 40, I think, with the colour photo on the cover.
Yes, yeah.
So yes, I mean, it's been in my head a long time, the pictures of the clowns and whatever, but I've never read the Target book. Sort of vaguely knew what the story was, but yeah, good to finally get that.
I get the impression that the Celestial Toymaker captured a lot of people's imagination for a long time when they couldn't see it. Didn't mean that pejoratively exactly, but I got that sense, and I did get the Target novelization when I was a kid because I was very single-minded about Target books. I only got missing episode stories.
Oh.
If I could see it on the TV, I didn't bother to read it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
For better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you had more access to it on the TV than we had.
Yeah.
Well, just so, like our last episode when we discussed The Chase. Of course, I wouldn't have seen Celestial Toymaker until the Hartnell years on VHS, and then, of course, it was on Lost in Time.
Yeah.
I believe they included Sylvester McCoy's linking chat about Celestial Toymaker on the animated release. So that's what I would have seen, just obviously the episode 4. And then I would have gotten the audio with narration when I started collecting those in the maybe the late aughts or early 10s.
Yeah.
I didn't read the book. Pretty sure I didn't read the book. I think I must have experienced it as a loose cannon reconstruction sent off for on VHS in the late 90s or early 2000s, where you sent a tape in the post and they sent it back with a quite difficult to make out series of images and a quite difficult to make out audio soundtrack. Because I never had the Hartnell years for some reason. I had Troughton, Daleks and Cybermen and Pertwee, funnily enough. So I must have seen a blurry copy of episode 4 on that bootleg, and then not until Lost in Time would I have seen it properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think again I'm with Richard that that's Doctor Who Weekly. Both the archive and those pictures and things were very influential on setting the idea that this was some amazing classic story. I don't recall ever reading the book. I'm sure I had it, but I don't think it ever got read.
Who
It
read
was
the book?
relatively late, I think.
It was Jerry Davis and Alison Bingeman or something.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
The production subtitles say something about her being a Canadian writer with which Davis collaborated, but I don't know any more than that.
It was 86. It was novelised, so it was definitely in that phase when they were mopping up some of the later Hartnells and things like that.
I'd be quite interested to have a look at that. I might get the audiobook if there is one, because as you may be aware, I've been up to my eyeballs in the Celestial Toymaker analysis for quite a while. But one thing I never thought to look into was the novelisation. Obviously, that was a while after Brian Hales died, and presumably, if Brian Hales had been asked to novelise it, he still wouldn't have necessarily reinstated much of his original script, but it might have given us some more clues. So maybe the Jerry Davis novelization will maybe point me towards a few other things, because we might suspect that he would further hone some of the ideas that he introduced in his final rewrite.
Definitely a few things in just judging by the production subtitles.
Yes.
There's stuff that gets discussed in there that he brings out some interesting, not sure he goes so far as to say subtexts, but themes about the Toymaker and so on, which maybe relate to. I'm not sure whether they would have been, but we'll come on to that. And I'm not sure whether I saw this through any hooky VHS before the Hartnell years came out. Probably not, given that was 91. And then, I think I was very unimpressed by that, and then would have seen it on Lost in Time again. And then, like Jess, would have had the audio, the narrated soundtrack version, all of which, tried my patience with it.
Well, it's a pretty difficult soundtrack, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, particularly episode 1 is rather nasty to start with. The tape has some sort of click and a hum, which I was thinking that the audio that Mark Ayres would have prepared may have used some new source. I noticed that the source of the audio was not the credited. There's 2 credited on the audio CD, and it's not the same people. They're not credited at all in the animation.
It's one of the newly recorded ones.
Is it the Randolph tapes?
Is that the ones that came up that nobody quite knows the source of?
Yes.
A couple of years ago?
Maybe.
I say a couple of years. Like
the funny thing
like
is
10 years these days.
But yeah, right. The funny thing, though, is at the beginning of episode 1, you can still hear that fault. There's still that sort of clicking there. It's just that the hum is gone, and I don't know if that's Mark Ayres working his magic or what. But you can still hear there's that click of I don't know what's wrong with the tape, but it wasn't set right, and so it's clunking a little bit. But this is like the first 5 minutes. It's gone pretty soon afterwards, but that makes it noticeably rougher than some of the other, even for the 2000s. It was pretty rough.
It's taken from the new sources, and it's the first one where they've been able to use these new recoveries, where it's an appreciable improvement because it falls in between. There's certain stories that fall through the cracks of what was recorded on the inline, wired into the TV soundtracks and things like that, and this is the first one. So he mentioned that when I was at the BFI when they did the premiere screening of this. Almost complete, but still with one scene where literally it was seat of the pants time that they were. I may as well talk about this now if anyone's, if you've got the patience. But it was an interesting experience because no one had seen. Literally, no one had seen the animation apart from Mark Ayres, who was there, and he had they'd sent the supposedly final links across from Australia like the previous night for him to put his final soundtrack on, and he had then found there was something where the offline edit, or they hadn't hooked up to a source for one particular file, and so he had to dub in or cut in the preliminary finished version of like one scene from episode 1, which suddenly came up with incomplete footage or something like that as a watermark on it.
Right.
And it was quite it was an experience because certainly I think we all went in there with a certain level of trepidation, and Dick Fiddy and Justin Richards were not Justin Richards, Justin. Were introducing it on the stage and going, well, this is going to be a experience, and kind of trying to they were being somewhat guarded because they obviously didn't know what they were going what exactly they were going to see either. And it was only really because they got Mark up to introduce and to talk about it for about 5 minutes before they actually started showing any of it. And he said, well, I think it's unusual, but I think it's something rather special, really. And, they've done something quite clever with it. And I think that was the first hint that people thought, okay, gives this, be interesting to see. And as things went on, I think certainly I warmed to it a great deal. And it was really the first time I've enjoyed experiencing the story.
Ditto.
In this form. It's
yes.
Radical though it is, and it's not something that works for it's not going to work for every story.
Yeah, it's funny. I suspect I enjoy the animation more than I would enjoy the episodes if they were recovered. I think that the level of visual interest and the ingenuity and the design choices were all really stimulating. And maybe I wouldn't feel there would be quite such a chasm between the two if I wasn't pretty familiar with the set photos. But the reality is, going into a booth to do the instructions for the Blind Man's Buff game is clearly a more boring situation than what was presented in the animation, which was funny and fun. And there was an awful lot to like. And of course, all of the upside down gravity defying assault course was something that was never attempted, but the kind of fun you can have when you open up the format, and once you have made the decision that it's not a slavish recreation, you can add value to the story. I would say do one or two things: either try to do it slavishly or go mad with it, because if it falls between two stools, you kind of think, why change some bits but not others if they're just small changes? But there's not always much opportunity to make big changes. So of all stories, this was a magical, visual, nonsensical opportunity to present a feast for the eyes and the brain. So yeah, really, really enjoyed the animation.
It was most definitely a display of the improvements that had been made in the technology since Web of Fear 3.
Yes, yeah.
It was much more impressive and much less jarring to watch. It didn't take you out necessarily of it. And I would also say, to your point, Gav, that I think only certain stories should be made this way if I had my way. I think that story absolutely needed some life injected into it that this kind of animation could do. I don't feel like many of the already produced animations would somehow be improved if that's how, if they suddenly changed it to make it look like the Celestial Toymaker, not necessarily with all the fantasy, but the design of the characters. I'm not necessarily convinced that would be better, so I would like a little bit of both. And I think both can work effectively depending on the story that you're designing.
I did enjoy the animation, and I think it does a great job of explaining the story, because without all the visual stuff you can see, there's a lot of noise on that soundtrack of stuff going on that's very difficult to interpret. I mean, I know you've probably got Peter Purvis telling you this is what's happening, but it's kind of hard to visualize just from an audio track. So I did enjoy that, but funnily enough, having done that and then coming back to the reconstruction, I then enjoyed the reconstruction even more. And I think for me, because of and admittedly with very limited photographic material to work with, because everything has to either come, I suppose, from episode 4 or from lots of photos, but maybe not so many of the characters. But because you get the actual expressions of the of real actors in that, somehow that kind of worked for me. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm probably being contrary, but I enjoyed watching both. I got a different feeling about Stephen and Dodo the second time round than I did the first time round, but we might come to that in a minute.
I feel sure.
The other thing that I guess made a reconstruction possible is this kind of massive array of photos of the sets, which I hadn't been aware of at all until I saw them in a TARDIS magazine, DWAS magazine, 2 or 3 years ago. Robbie Dunlop did a feature about it and illustrated with lots of these photos, and suddenly I thought, oh gosh, here's something I'd never seen before. Now I dare say that the rest of you had been aware of these photos for a while, but that was something new for me. And it's a shame, I think, in the extant episode 4 we don't get really to see very much of that. You do get a brief glimpse of the doll's house, but it's not very distinct.
That was new to me when I watched the photo gallery on the DVD. There was lot of stuff that I hadn't seen there, and really appreciating the significance of the doll's house as obviously a major element of the original production. Certainly, there was obviously a lot of stuff went on with that we're not privy to, but
I found quite a few of the photos actually online. I had been looking for photos because of the videos I did. I did 2 music videos on Celestial Toymaker, and came across this repository of most, if not all, of those photos. I would have to look up the name of the website. It doesn't come to mind at the moment, but each story had its own page of photos uploaded, and so they are out there, I believe.
Not the Tragical History Tour.
Thank you. That is correct. That is the one, I believe. Yeah. I think there was another one that's called the Space Museum or something, but that's I'm sure what you say, Gav, is the one I was thinking of.
It's not the Chairs of Doctor Who.
There's a Facebook group called the Doctor Who Photo Research Group.
Of course.
That's very much worth joining because they have diligently aggregated every available picture of every story, and every time a better version or a slightly less cropped version, it gets posted in the comments as a thread. So that's now my go-to. Always used to be the Tragical History Tour, but the Photo Research Group has very much usurped that. It's just extraordinary, really diligently done.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the background of this story a little bit?
I think you ought to.
Yeah, please do.
I might be quite well posed at this point. It's at least
Carry
fresh
on,
in
then.
my mind. So Brian Hales wrote 4 episodes that were originally quite dark, quite psychologically orientated, playing on themes of childhood and perhaps family, but they were deemed too dark, and he was asked to go away and rewrite them, which he did. So he delivered a second draft, which probably contained quite a lot of chunks that survived through to the final version. Donald Tosh then did his script writing duties, and he latched on to a couple of characters that Hales had written that were an aunt and uncle that befriended Stephen and Dodo, and then they get steadily more creepy as the story goes on. And they were named after a pair of characters called George and Margaret, who were the subject of a play by a playwright called Gerald Savary, although they don't actually appear in the play. It's like a Waiting for Godot kind of situation. It seems that Donald Tosh tried to punch up the dialogue a little bit and take the George and Margaret characters, steer the story a little bit more towards witty banter perhaps, and then Donald Tosh went on holiday and Jerry Davis took over, and he allegedly, on the instruction of Gerald Savary, removed George and Margaret. So it's generally said that in their place Jerry Davis put half a dozen new characters. We know that's definitely true of the clowns. The clowns were not in the original draft or the rewrite. But we also have the pairs of characters that are Rug and Wiggs and the King and Queen of Hearts. Now, it's generally thought that they were new additions by Jerry Davis, but in my recent YouTube video, I posed the question, and I still pose this to all of us here tonight. If those 4 characters were not in the original, who was? Who did George and Margaret and Stephen Dodo meet along the way if those characters were all new by Jerry Davis? So it's my suspicion that those characters, in some form, maybe only as small parts, were originally in it. And there is some evidence in the script, in this palimpsest of a document, that they might have been in it before Jerry Davis got his hands on it. So you got 3 authors who each wrote chunks, and Donald Tosh's chunks were pretty much deleted by Jerry Davis. So the final version is really Brian Hales and Jerry Davis's script, but Donald Tosh takes a lot of credit, and that may be because
that's not like him at all.
maybe because that's in his nature, but it may also be the case that he told Brian Hales what to put in his first draft. We will never know. But Donald Tosh has sometimes taken credit for things and sometimes not. So that, to me, suggests that he can't quite remember.
So when you're talking about like meeting characters along the way, do we know, was the basic structure of it being like the Doctor would be taken off and be interacting with the Toymaker, and there would be a series of quests or Stephen and Dodo on doing something like what they were doing.
The Trilogic game definitely featured in the original version.
Okay.
Whether it was ultimately meant to be a way of sidelining the Doctor, I'm not sure. So it's conceivable that the Trilogic game was one of the games played and they just moved past it. And it was later used as this device to compartmentalize the Doctor while Stephen and Dodo went on the quest. But the original pitch, the one-line pitch for this story was that the Doctor and co meet a space Mandarin, fall beneath his power. They have to solve a series of 4 riddles in order to escape.
Okay.
So the 4 riddle structure was always present.
Right. Okay.
So from that we can infer that broadly the way the story is navigated hasn't changed. But yes, it's possible that the Trilogic game was expanded to do this thing of taking William Hartnell out for 2 episodes.
And you use the term Space Mandarin and to go near that particular live veil. Was that in the original? That's actually in the wording of.
That's in the wording of
Hales'
the
original
first.
pitch.
Yeah, the first ever mention of this story mentions a Space Mandarin, and
Okay.
I mean it has been counter-argued that Mandarin can mean a bureaucrat, but considering they included the Tower of Hanoi game, which is what the Trilogic game is,
Yes.
the connection to the east is established, I think. So
Yes, I think that would be special pleading to say it's Mandarin in the
Yeah.
sense of Whitehall.
yeah, and this is at a time when you have Flash Gordon versus Ming the Merciless. You know, an alien space Mandarin, if you like. I mean, you've also got the Mandarin in the Iron Man comics that was running concurrently as well.
Yes.
So it's definitely a trope. I would be surprised if it had any other meaning behind it. And the mystical Oriental magician is just is one of these stereotypes, and it comes up again in Talons of Weng Chiang. So I don't think any of that is coincidental.
I think it's definitely a meaning that was lost along the way. So I think for the majority of Doctor Who fans who came across the phrase "the Celestial Toymaker," we looked at that and we thought, yes, of the stars. And okay, so we saw the Oriental costume, but Celestial to my generation didn't have that Eastern connotation, which it might have done to previous generations. So yeah.
Johnny Morris said to me after seeing my YouTube video, he doesn't think that Celestial was used in the Far Eastern sense at all. He thinks that was a coincidence, essentially, and that,
right,
as you say, that wouldn't have been a known term for a 1960s audience. He thinks it was probably a reference to the Celestial Omnibus. And so then the link to Talons of Weng Chiang, where you've got a very similar style of character who's referred to as the Celestial Chang, that may be connecting 2 dots that shouldn't be connected, because arguably Jago uses Celestial in that context because he's from the 19th century.
Yeah.
So to him, that was
Indeed.
So that's Robert Holmes drawing on his knowledge rather than Bob Holmes thinking that's a term that people will understand.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we're probably a bit lucky that. Do we know when the because there's always this other phrase that an Occidental Mandarin is in the script. I think it's in the script, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do we know when that got introduced? Is that a Tosh thing, or is that?
I'm not sure. I can't remember.
And we probably dodged a bullet there, possibly, as a result of that being introduced.
Well, I guess the good thing is that there's none of that kind of nasty makeup or
exactly.
kind of,
Spared Michael Gough wearing eye tape and
Indeed.
stuff like that. But
yeah.
Jess, of course, being our transatlantic correspondent here, we're also always told, Celestial, in that sense, is better known in the US as being a byword for Chinese or Oriental, East Asian.
I can certainly say, with my expertise as an American, that I'd never heard of it. At least someone who was as old as I am, never heard it. Didn't really make the connection. Not that I was necessarily too inquisitive about such things when I was younger, so it wouldn't necessarily have occurred to me to make the connection. But that could very well be. You know, I know we had an influx of Chinese workers to build our railroads. I think that's the story. Yeah. Sorry, it's been a while. But someone knows better than I, but it is not me.
I think Wikipedia mentions it as an unsavory term in America. But funnily enough, having when I was looking for a visual reference to put on screen when talking about this term in my YouTube video, the only use of celestial I could, well, not the only use, but a nice, useful visual was a tourism poster, which was American, saying take a trip to the Celestial Empire from California or wherever it was.
Okay.
So it's interesting that Wikipedia on the one hand says, well, America's the place that it's offensive, while also America is the only source of a mainstream use of the word in clearly not an offensive
in the sense of
context
as a marketing pitch.
Yeah.
It could be one of those inadvertently offensive things. You know, that it was used without knowledge of its offense, which is often perhaps the case.
I think I've seen clips from Deadwood of possibly Ian McShane as Zal Swearingen using it in that context, but obviously that is very much trying to be a very nitty-gritty reconstruction of the Old West.
And if they did all their research on Wikipedia, then it's just self-perpetuating. Wikipedia will now cite Deadwood as a source of the racial slur.
Yes.
Splendid.
Well, and thankfully the one genuine, unquestionable piece of racism in this episode has been excised for the animation.
Yes.
So we don't need to worry about that anymore.
An ad lib, I will hasten to add.
Yes.
I mean, that actor was causing problems left, right, and centre because he ad libbed My Friends Call Me Billy as well. Which did not help the Billy Bunter kerfuffle.
But that's an ad lib. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's not the same actor, though. It's just the spirit of ad libbing. That was Campbell Singer who. Yeah,
I thought. Sorry, I you're right. Of course, it was. Yeah,
it's the king of hearts.
It's the king of hearts.
Begins. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Eeny meeny.
Quite.
Yes.
Still interesting that the other thing's an ad lib, though. Yeah, definitely.
On that subject, though, your videos and others too, but your videos, Gab, have got me inspired to actually look at camera scripts and find interesting bits of information. Some of them indicate music cues, which I didn't know how revealing that would be to me, but I do find it interesting, their documentation. And it does feel like, having watched the reconstruction and actually followed along with the camera script, that there was a fair amount of ad-libbing that was going on, or perhaps a little bit more was allowed. It could be that the scripts didn't notate the lines exactly. You might know that better than me, but several things seem ad-lib, not just William Hartnell, moving around his lines a little bit and so on, but Carmen Silvera ad-libs, so we are not amused.
I suppose it's probably worth saying that the definition of ad-lib is a bit murky, because some of these things will have been worked out in rehearsals.
True.
So if they were worked out in rehearsals with the rehearsal script, then changes will have potentially been then written into the camera scripts. Although, the function of the camera scripts was to direct the cameras, the technical side of things. So actors and their rehearsal scripts, they might have held onto their rehearsal scripts and just had their lines changed in pencil. Then the day of the recording, you had camera rehearsals as well. So you essentially had a final rehearsal on the day that it was going before the cameras. So if, again, something was worked out on that afternoon that they said, oh, this would be funny, or can I get away with this? Or or they say, "Oh, I'm just going to try this," and the director won't be able to stop me. So the three forms of ad libs could be come up with in first rehearsals, come up with in camera rehearsals on the day, or come up with basically as live, that nobody had heard these people say these things until the cameras were on them. I don't know how many fall into the third category, because when we think of ad libs, we tend to think of absolute spontaneity, but some of these might have all been agreed, everyone signed off on it, and then they shot it, and there's just no written record of it. All we can say is that neither Hales nor Tosh nor Davis wrote it. So either the actor or the director came up with these things or thought it was a good idea. And I would speculate that the dodgier they are, the more likely they were spontaneous. But
that makes sense.
You know, it's a bit of a myth that these things were unedited. If somebody absolutely objected, then it would have been cut. So the idea that a swear word made it through because it was ad-libbed is misleading. Swear words would have made it through if it was broadcast actually live. Famously, they would drop swear words in to make sure things were cut. If they'd fluffed a line and they thought there was a chance that it would get left in, they would deliberately swear to make sure it got taken out. So it was reasonable to say that anything that's on screen has been rubber stamped by the director, even if it's a case of the director saying, it's not worth taking out. I would quite like to, but just leave it.
It's interesting on the commentaries. I didn't listen to all of the commentaries, but I listened to a couple of Peter Purvis's ones, and amongst there may be some not entirely accurate recollections in there, but some or stuff that he's picked up through being asked about things and being told things too many times. He does have a quite interesting description of the procedure, and he was talking about emphasising the thing about the vision mixer will be cutting very much on the lines and on the word that he'd go okay and go to camera so and so, more than on what was actually happening on screen. He'd be listening to the script and going boom 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 and doing live mixing in that way. So that again speaks to the idea that the script had to be pretty much locked down, and very unlikely that anyone would have been messing around in recording.
Well, there's a famous story of Pertwee and Troughton not getting on because Troughton would tend to approximate his lines, and Pertwee would get very frustrated because he needed the final word of the line as his cue for the next line of dialogue, whereas Troughton was much more loose and improvisational. And if you watch a Troughton episode reading along with the camera script, they're very rarely word for word, but part of that is choice and part of that is the enormous pressures they were under to learn 25 minutes of script in 7 days, week after week after week. I don't know how they did it.
Oh my God, yeah.
I also had a go at those commentaries, and the note that I made was, poor Toby, if you're listening to this, my sympathies, because it's all old people who can't remember a bloody thing, and all they do remember is wrong. and Toby's is so polite, he doesn't really want to have to contradict them, although you could feel the straining at the leash once or twice. So, yeah, I mean, there are, as you say, Giles, there's some interesting tidbits here and there, but it is kind of a bit of an effort to get through at times as well.
You put them in an escape room as punishment.
Yeah. So, I guess other aspects of the animation. I mean, so I kind of felt, particularly in episode 3, where they are with the sergeant and the cook, Stephen feels quite belligerent in that episode, and particularly the way that the animation is drawn. I thought, why is he being so unnecessarily belligerent here? And then watching it through in the reconstruction, I got a completely different idea looking at the stills and so on. I mean, he's still obviously being antagonistic, but it feels more natural. I don't know if it's just the sort of uncanny valley that makes me think, oh, he's being super belligerent, when in fact it's more it's a battle, but it's not really Stephen being unnecessarily aggressive.
It is a little odd I think you're right in it that the animation plays up to it, but there is a really weird interaction between those two.
Yeah.
And Stephen is very oddly macho in some of his comments. But then that carries over to Cyril as well. He basically wants to have a fight with a schoolboy in the next episode as well. It's peculiar. I don't have an answer to the question. It's just weird.
It is weird. And then the other thing that I noticed is that Dodo seems quite out of character in this one, but...
Well, like the character of a 17th century French peasant girl kind of
well,
character.
she does feel like a 17th century French peasant girl when you kind of realise that that's how she's originally written, because in that case the being overly trusting kind of works rather a lot better.
Yeah. She's so naive in this story. I think that's a big ghost of Anne Chapley.
Interesting point.
And one of the little things I noticed looking at the scripts, she has a line that originally says, "It looks boring," and they've written in "dead boring." So that's just jumped out to me as their concession to modernising some. I don't know, that may be a leap, but I feel there's a lot of that material that you could give to Anne Chapley, and there would be no incongruity at all in the way she speaks, the way she acts. And yeah, she has a childlike innocence that you don't really see in any other story. And Stephen seems to be over-explaining things to her in a way that doesn't happen in other stories as well.
Oh my goodness,
he's
yes.
constantly reinforcing. There's so many lines where he's saying, "Don't forget," and you remember this, and you know, it does strike me that is the is perhaps a hangover from an earlier, more basic character.
You might very well be right, but I don't even see it as Anne Chapley, knowing that it might come from an earlier version of her. She's just like, an 8-year-old who's utterly obtuse and naive and trusting. Of course, she has her moments of adulthood. We were speaking about Stephen's macho behavior in episode 3. She quite rightly calls him out in that episode. It's like, well, if they're not real, you can't get angry at them. That's a much more mature perspective to have given Stephen, and Stephen takes it seriously, which is good. But she doesn't get a lot of opportunities like that. Otherwise, she's, forgetting what Stephen just said. He's standing on the slippery powder in episode 4, and she blasts her way through it, and Stephen has to catch her. I mean, it's unfortunate because she doesn't have to come off like a complete dolt, but so many times she does, and it's not complimentary to a character who did not get much opportunity to give an impression, to have a character develop. I mean, the poor character, was quickly changed from a, Cockney 60s girl to an RP speaking girl of almost no background, except that apparently her mother died, which we see in episode 1 on the memory window.
Yeah, her mother died in France 300 years ago.
Quite. Quite.
Isn't she a Cockney Mancunian? But
I was
anyway,
going to say, she spent some time trying to leave from the north at some point, doesn't she, as well?
Who can say? But I mean, it's just very frustrating, especially when you have only the dialogue. I was saying my first exposure to this is pretty much the audio. And, it's the sort of thing that makes me listen to it for completeness sake. And I started listening to it again only because I was researching Dudley Simpson. And so I'm now much more familiar with it than I would ever want to be quite honest.
I think there's an awful lot of truth in what you say, in that there's moments listening to that soundtrack that feel like we are missing reactions, we are missing playfulness, and there's several bits in that where she's teasing Stephen for the way he's behaving, and you get, I feel we're getting like 20% of what that interaction is, because we're not seeing, nudge nudge, wink wink, whatever she's doing. And I think that is a big problem with this story overall. these scripts underran, and that was before Jerry Davis then started reworking them. And I'm very conscious of the fact that 3 big examples of lengthy sequences with no dialogue. The first one is Blind Man's Buff, which you just no idea what's going on. And to worsen it, it's punctuated with a horn, which is just an added annoyance. The scene in the kitchen, which descends into a crockery / bun fight, is you can't derive any enjoyment from the audio of that. And the only saving grace of the lengthy ballerina sequences is of course Dudley Simpson. So I mean, imagine if this was a more avant-garde soundtrack, or a story where they'd skimped on the music.
Or some Strauss waltz or something. Something inane. It really does, suffer from that, which is why, of course, like all episodes, it would be marvelous to see them, and the animation does a fair amount of good work in trying to bring back those impressions. But like some of the directions in Blind Man's Buff, where Joey is actually doing these rather comical things that he may have done and are in the script, the camera script, he takes out a giant file, and the animation has him just barely looking at his fingernails, as if to reflect that direction was there, but he doesn't take out an enormous comedy file and start to work on his nails. There's an unforgettable direction where, as Dodo is complaining to Clara, Clara is supposed to take her hat off and pull out a hard-boiled egg and give it to Dodo. I actually might pay good money to see that, because that would completely bring this to life, even if it doesn't make it any more, badly written. I'm glad you brought up the idea of being underwritten. That completely explains the constant re-explaining of the plot in several cases, to my mind anyway.
One of the things that happened was, after Donald Tosh had finished his rewrite of the Brian Hale script, because they underran so much, John Wiles was tasked with taking what he could from the original Brian Hale script that Tosh had rewritten and just dropping pages in wherever possible that would just pad out the runtime.
Oh, wow.
And so that's why I think there's a really good example in episode 1 where they kind of discover the Celestial Toymaker twice, because some of those pages are the Brian Hale's version where the Doctor's thinking, oh God, I think we're in the realm of the Celestial Toymaker, and then they go outside and and then suddenly it's the Celestial Toymaker, and they're like, who's that? And he's like, I'll tell you who it is. I think we're in the realm of the Celestial Toymaker.
He might have guessed.
I might have guessed.
And I think basically you're looking at the Brian Hale's reveal and the Donald Tosh reveal running consecutively. And there's certain bits, like I think the conversations about whether these people are real or not, I think they're lifted out of the Hale's script, because suddenly the action stops dead for Stephen and Dodo to just stand and have a little bit of banter for 2 minutes about, are these people alive? Why do you believe they're alive? It's not progressing anything. It comes out of nowhere. And I think that's just like copy paste. How can we get this close to 24.5 minutes?
I mean, that scene in its way is not awful in the sense that we get a little bit more insight into Stephen and Dodo's thinking. I mean, theoretically, not that we haven't figured that out by now, I think, but it's one of those character moments that are sometimes
it
lost.
just doesn't feel woven in. It feels choppy to me.
I see what you mean. Yeah, sort of cut and paste.
But who can say whether it was choppy in the first place?
It's interesting because, with regard to the animation, and I guess that's the thing, that because you can never be faithful in any reconstruction because you can't we don't know what the acting choices were from moment to moment, and what business people were doing that was non-verbal. So I guess this is, to add some dynamism to the visuals and the camera angles and things like that, and this just tries to make everything a lot more visually interesting as a means of creating something that's an enjoyable viewing experience, I guess, because otherwise, if you can't fill in those gaps of how, of coming close to what the acting would be, and you're in a story where, to be honest, it does sound like an awful lot of it comes across as being very flat and not engaging really, and just being very kind of facile sort of thing. Then
with that in mind, the toy maker Michael Goff, I mean, I noted that I felt he was quite underplayed, but he's the opposite of a scenery chewer. And I suppose in fairness to him, he's got 2 episodes where he's just acting to nothing, which isn't really going to help him very much. But even in the first episode, he's a little bit kind of flat, I suppose is a word I would use. And then he does come to life a bit in the 4th episode where he's got some people to act with, even though there was a bit of that in the first as well. So we're led to believe this is an amazing opponent, and they even sort of thought about bringing him back in the 80s because he was so well remembered by people of a certain generation. But actually, listening to the soundtrack and seeing what we've got, it's sort of hard to see why the Celestial Toymaker would have been quite so revered.
Yes. At the same time, I sort of understand, Richard, why he might underplay it, considering the fact that everything about the dolls and all the people that Stephen and Dodo face, the creatures, the dolls, they have to be really larger than life and overplayed. Yeah. So, it could have worked, if somehow he managed a Philip Maddock warlord type of performance that maybe could have been more sinister. He seems a touch sinister, but I don't think... Maybe he needed to go in some different direction. Maybe, I don't know.
I don't have a problem with it personally, but I admittedly, as you say, it's a big challenge because he's really got nothing to act against. He's basically monologuing for 3 episodes of the story. 3 and a bit, more or less. But I think he comes over remarkably well, and I think with the in the animation, I think he's the best characterization in it in terms of the human characters, or the humanoid characters within it. And I gather that the original thinking, I mean, Gav, this is possibly back to you, but as I understand it, some of the original thinking was that he was going to be a time... Obviously, we didn't call them Time Lords back then. There's a suggestion...
I think Donald Tosh made that up in about 1999 for his 400th interview. I can't find any reference to that before the Mythmakers. I could be wrong.
Right, it makes it onto
the
production video. Notes, anyway.
I would take a lot of those production notes with a lot of salt.
Okay,
myself.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's kind of the point of my video, was we've heard a lot of stories down the years. So I'm going to look at these allegations versus the paperwork, because that's all we've got of the hope of the possible truths.
I do like the design of this. I mean, we've talked about the doll's house. I think they've done a great job of coming up with the chairs as well, sort of to look distinctive. I mean, yes, the original sets are, it's limited in what you can fit into that studio, and so on. But it does feel pretty creative for the first 3 episodes. The 4th one doesn't have a lot going for it. I don't think that the game they play with Cyril is a bit sort of lackluster. But yeah, no, I mean, I think. Particularly the doll's house, but I feel like the design is pretty good in the circumstances.
I agree. I think that's the real winner of the story, is the costumes, the makeup, and the design. Particularly the Hart family looks amazing, I think. Especially in color, and the makeup used to indicate the dancing dolls, as well as the clown makeup. I think is great, and I think it really, injects kind of some life into this, and so that's really the winner for me, as well as a certain composer's music. But I don't have to say I don't have to say that.
Well, let's come to that in a sec. I mean, the only other thing I was going to say on that was I like Carmen Silva doing her Lady Bracknell act, really, as the Queen of Hearts.
Yes.
It was a nice little touch. Go on, talk about the music then, Jess.
It's very similar in style to The Chase. Of course, it's almost the same orchestration, although there are 6 musicians in this ensemble rather than just 5 in the chase. But it's very similar sound. There's the clarinet with contrabass clarinet. That's that low honking that you hear particularly in a lot of parts, including what is unusual about the Celestial Toymaker is like the chase, it has a kind of opening theme, or at least a piece of music that got put on to the beginning of most episodes, kind of like the beginning of the chase and what would eventually happen in some Troughton stories. A lot of good use of piano and organ, and a lot of great percussion as well. Mallet percussion, vibraphones, and marimbas and stuff. The percussion, of course, the wood blocks make a very important sound here with a very important presence in the texture of the music. And I think in some ways the music fares better than the chase dramatically, because there's a little bit of consistency and further consistency in terms of the tone. It's all kind of dark and sinister, yet fun and goofy. There's a nice mix of that, whereas in the chase, there's also some of that. It's not nearly as dark. It's much more rhythmic and jazz bandy, to use that kind of term. I like the sinister sounds, the thicker harmonies. The theme tune is really good because it simultaneously brings that sense of fun with a lot of weird sounding notes. That guitar chord doesn't match with the organ sound, doesn't match with the contrabass clarinet. Ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum. Wow. It's all weird. And Simpson really kind of goes to town on a lot of those cues. And so I think it benefits from having that more consistent tone to it. And again, I've certainly grown to appreciate it a lot more since I started doing the project. I got to investigate a lot of other stories that I didn't really pay attention to for reasons that I've started to describe, at least dramatically. But I think the music's great, and I think it really stands out how interesting it could be. It could really push the boundaries of harmony and texture, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, some unusual choices. I was noticing the organ particularly because I don't know how often he uses it, but I feel I don't often notice it. And there were some dramatic stings using the organ that were particularly effective and interesting.
Yes.
And the ballerina theme as well, on the face of it, should be... It sort of lulls you into thinking it's quite pretty, and you can tell me if this is in my mind or if this is a technical achievement, but it has a kind of a detached, slightly ethereal, almost sinister sense to it. It achieves saying these aren't fun ballerinas, whilst on a surface level it seems to be quite a cheery little ditty, but there's something going on that gives an undertone, and I don't know whether that's just context or whether he's very clever. I mean, he is very clever.
I think it's safe to say there's both there. I think you're right with that interpretation. We were talking last time I was with you about the Devil's Chord and the discussion of the tritone. The dancing floor is a bunch of tritones. It's a bunch of weird, wide intervals. Melodically, the harmonies are a little bit denser, a little bit more tritony. But there's a rhythm, there's a dance element to it that brings off this lighter, ethereal sound that you describe. And I did a video on that very piece. It's great because, of course, nothing happens for a minute. And so I can just sit there and we can sit there and listen to the music absent the pictures. But yes, I think that's exactly what comes off there very well. And what I loved about analyzing that piece is some of the surprising note choices. One of my favorite things about music, especially of Dudley Simpson, is how he uses the wrong notes correctly. There are some notes that you wouldn't necessarily think of if you were a more standard composer. You would not dare to try to juggle such a dissonance and make it and catch it, if I can continue the metaphor. And I think he does it very, very nicely.
I think what I was just managed to just about put my finger on is, on the face of it, the ballerina theme is cheery, but the undertone is melancholic. And it's that there's a slightly lilting, melancholic sense, and I guess it's sort of conveying that feeling of resignation to their fate, which is
Right.
forthcoming. But there's something in the melody that is repetitious and not fun, and it gives you just a little sense of foreboding.
Yes.
I like the way you described that music, Jess, and the way Dudley Simpson works, because it reminded me, in a very different medium, of the writing of Douglas Adams, that kind of use of words in unlikely ways. That's, or like the wrong words in the right way, or something like that. The unexpected words that somehow mean something, even when you bring them together.
Yes, yes. And speaking of Hitchhiker's Guide, what I love about Paddy Kingsland's music is kind of the opposite. It's so unrepentantly jolly and fun for all this weirdness and strangeness and danger that actually comes along. So much of his music is just kind of light and bubbly and fun. It actually works as a wonderful foil to it. I'm not sure that music works in the same way with something more serious with Doctor Who, but I think it's perfect for that. I think it's the perfect foil for the humor and seriousness there. And so you can go that way of maybe ironic pleasantness and joyfulness and lightness and brightness of sound. Or you can go this darker route that Simpson has gone and seems to really enjoy, particularly at this time, when you could write full-fledged pieces and you weren't just writing atmosphere, you were writing melodies and harmonies and so on. I think he really takes that on. And then there's still room for moments of lightness too, that lovely popping sort of dance when the dolls come out of the cupboard in episode 2. That's kind of a lovely, short little miniature. And so on. I could go.
Have you looked much at the production file paperwork regarding Dudley Simpson?
I've started to get some of that. Beyond the scripts, I, of course, bought David Brunt's book. And so, obviously, most, if not all, of the materials are covered there.
Did he do the music for the Space Pirates?
He did.
So I was looking through the production paperwork for the Space Pirates, and there's a lot of correspondence about the music in that.
Aha.
So I'll send you that over, because I was thinking about these choices that are being made. Like, famously, we're told that Dalek Invasion of Earth was too scary, so the third Dalek serial had to be sillier. And that's why it's a wacky comedy with funny jazz music. That's the story, we're told. I've not seen any correspondence in the production file that says, Dear Dudley, can you write us some hilarious, wacky jazz music? Because we do not want the Daleks to be scary this time. That's not to say that doesn't exist. I just literally haven't gone looking and haven't seen it. But, I mean, in the Celestial Toymaker, all of his choices make sense in their own right. I bring up the Chase as an example of those choices seem more incongruous unless he's been directed to lighten the tone a bit or do something, just that amuses him, that is avant-garde. Because obviously he was writing without having seen it. So it's not like he's seen the episode and gone, oh, this is very silly, I'm going to write some very silly music. So these choices fascinate me in terms of how much did Richard Martin say, this needs to be quite a lot of fun, because I'm going to make this a lot of hilarious jokes.
There's a lot of paperwork regarding music and conversations between director and composer for The Planet of Giants. It seems like for Simpson's very first story, he got to be very hands-on. He actually attended several telerecording sessions. When episodes 3 and 4 were edited together, he attended the dubbing session. So after that, maybe it just became a practical matter where he didn't need to do that. He would turn in his music and the director did it, and he wasn't involved once he did his job. But it's basically, as I'm learning, a conversation that was had between directors who would and composers would mark up their script and say, all right, want a bit of music here. In one document for Planet of Giants, one track is described as, what's the wording? Sustained effort and achieving purpose, which is the name of the track. And it's the track that you hear, I believe, when the four are lifting up the telephone.
Right.
the telephone handle. So sometimes they were given descriptions like that, the composers, and that's usually what they had to work on. They marked up, about how long they were going to need. I'm actually doing a video on this, which I hope to come out pretty soon, researching some of how music was made back in the 60s and the days before post-production made it possible to write, music to the second and closer. So I'm doing a video on that, and that's actually some of the stuff I've discovered. And I've been in touch with David because I loved his work so much, and I was like, I know the Troughton Years hasn't come out yet. Anyway, you could help me out before it comes out, because I don't want to wait till next year. So we'll see. Hopefully I can get something from that. Whether I can use it or not, it's really interesting to kind of, as you say, shine a light on how exactly that worked, how composers worked with directors. But that's essentially what it was. And so Richard Martin would have set the tone for the music of The Chase. Bill Sellers would have set the tone for the music of Celestial Toymaker. And it's not so much that the composer is so much a free agent. Taken some perhaps vague non-musician descriptions from a director, the composer then has to go and do something with it. And so, the more specific a description, the more, quote, accurate the music might turn out to be. But all that is a long-winded way of saying that there's not very much after Planet of Giants as regarding actual correspondence between director and composer, at least where Dudley Simpson is concerned. I haven't delved in as much with other composers, not that there's very much of that either.
I think we can infer logically some of the conversations that must have happened. I mean, the ballerinas is a great example, because clearly they can look at the script, or they could look at rehearsals and time approximately what's happening for how long with no dialogue, and a memo will have gone to Dudley saying, this section of this episode is dancing ballerinas, it'll last roughly this number of seconds, so we would like a ballerina theme. So there would be a degree of accuracy in the guidance based on script timings. So that makes a lot of sense.
There would have to be. It's only rarely that they could possibly try to land accurately, because performances will stretch and compress in live performance. And so a recording might have to be edited out or faded out, I guess is the right word. Or a director will say, well, I like this 30 seconds of stuff. Let's turn that into a loop. And that's how Blind Man's Buff was created. I mean, there's like 6 minutes of music, but in terms of quantity, it's like a minute and a half.
Oh, wow.
And so loops like that would be created, especially for long sequences like that, which were not so common, but long sequences like Blind Man's Buff, where a huge stretch of music is needed, and they didn't ask Simpson to write 5 minutes.
And music generally will fall into two categories as a consequence. Background music in that sense, whether it's loopable or not, or a sting, which will be designed to hit a moment, and those stings will be short so they can be cued and accurate.
For sure. That's right. Stings are a big part of all this.
And I guess in this case, we've also got these vignettes that probably would have been more directed to tie into the piece of music. So the dolls, the dancing floor, and the bit where they've done the real fantasia of the Toymaker, where it goes really kaleidoscopic.
Oh yeah, that's the dancing floor. The dancing floor part. Yeah.
Is that all connected together? No, I thought there were two separate sequences. Was my recollection, but maybe
the dancing floor part is where
they've
just gotten out of the kitchen, and then everything stops for a minute. And there's a dance which we unfortunately can't see. But that's that moment where nothing but music happens. Yeah. And then the Blind Man's Buff music comes back for the actual dance.
For the actual
dance. And that's,
right.
again, bunch of loopings happens there too.
But I guess that's the thing. So they would have, for certain things, they'd have choreographed to match. Okay, we know we have this length of piece of music, and we will do it as a silent sequence that will be cut to this length.
they would certainly try to time it out. And so ideally, they would know that the scene would last, as Gav says, X number of seconds. And then they would work out, okay, we can make this piece of music that Dudley has provided for us X number of seconds. And more or less, that will work out. As long as there's no stretching, as long as there's no fluffing, that will generally work out. And sometimes looping is the answer. Actually, I take it back regarding the dancing floor part. I think Blind Man's Buff Music has like an extra patch edited into it instead of being looped, because it doesn't have to be as long. But things like that were worked out in advance. And, and I'm learning that composers were best not to be too precious about their music, because it was going to get chopped up to be used properly in the program. So you had to be prepared for that, and you had to be able to contribute. Maybe you had to be able to contribute to say, okay, here's a good spot that we can cut, and here's where we can put that together so it will seem seamless. And I'm sure Simpson probably had a lot to do with that.
It's very interesting, because it's all these logistics that you don't really think about, and the whole thing has obviously been completely turned on its head in once we got to editing being an easier process.
Yes.
Jess, I'm just going to take a clip of your audio about composers not being precious and send it to Graham Allen, who does the music for my
I love Graham's music.
Graham is phenomenal, but I feel endless guilt about how I mess with what he says me.
I'm not saying I wouldn't feel precious. I'm not saying I wouldn't feel angry. I'm just saying you can't. It's not good for you as a composer to feel that way.
The number of times that he sent me a piece of music and it's great, and I put it in where I want it, and everything's fine, and then I shuffle things around a bit, and then it's like 10 seconds short. So what are my options? Do I bother him again? No, I just set the speed to 95%, so it's no longer the notes that he wanted in the first place. The other thing I do, I'll just like take a middle section, repeat it a few times, and then leave the ending in so that it ends in the right place. Sometimes I'll crossfade between two tracks and hope that my dreary narration obscures the butchery to his music. He must cry every time he watches a final video, because I repeatedly murder his contributions,
I'm sure.
which are always exceptional.
But you're right out of 1966, Gav.
Yes, yes, Graham.
It's all the right notes.
Graham, who never complains. How dare you?
Bless.
Yeah. You can hear him in the back of your mind. Yeah, it's all the right notes, but not in the right time signature. It's another one of these stories where it's called Doctor Who, but we don't really get to see Doctor Who very much. I mean, I wrote down Hartnell's back, hooray! About halfway through episode 4, because I really enjoy seeing him again in the last last eighth of the story, I suppose, because we've missed him so much along the way.
Yes. It's so strange that was a decision, and I know we could, especially you, Gav, could go on about some of the ideas about why that happened and what the thought process was of the possibly vindictive producer. But yeah, you do miss him, although Hartnell doesn't exactly do himself any favors with his voiceovers. Some of them sound like they are in a completely different production, including the very famous "It's Chair Number."
Yes,
it's funny. You can tell even right from the beginning, the trilogic game. Poor thing. A little bit of extra direction would have helped there, I think.
Yeah,
but it is too bad, because Hartnell is never boring. I find. I think he's an interesting character and always actively, engagingly performed by Hartnell. But yeah, he was a bit done dirty on this one.
When Hartnell says "it's chair number," it puts me in mind of the bit in Alan Partridge where he has a jingle made for his segment about family history, and he plays the jingle, and the woman on the jingle says, "Who do you think you are?" And he says, I apologise, the woman who did the voice wasn't given a sense of the line she read for that audio. And so when Hartnell goes, "It's chair number," I always think he wasn't given a sense of the line when he
Yeah, I
think
has
that's
to
right.
do that audio.
Not his fault, but yeah.
You would think in the context of the script he would understand that, but one of the many anecdotes that we're told is that these scripts were delivered so late they were reading the dialogue off idiot boards. Now, that's not really true because we know the scripts were finished a week before the pre-filming, but if there's any truth in it, it's not impossible that some bits of this dialogue were being worked out very last minute, and it's not impossible that Hartnell was handed a piece of paper that said, because that is a bit of pre-filming where he says it's chair number, so that would have been one of the very earliest bits that he worked on. So it's not inconceivable that he had no clue what the scripted page was. It's possible that he just had a line of text.
Just say
But
these
yes,
lines and we'll drop them in later.
Yeah, sounds like
when
he's
we
being
come to
touched on a
recording.
bus.
Yeah.
I guess it's going to be a common theme, I think, with the second story, but it's a weird situation. You know, the toy maker's got this brilliant imagination. He's desperate for somebody to play games with, and then he comes up with some of the most tedious games known to humanity.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've looked into the trilogic game, the Tower of Hanoi.
Yeah,
Basically, yes, it might be a moderately interesting brain teaser to just sort of figure out in your own time.
it's essentially binary, isn't it? Because basically the smallest piece moves every
One.
two, and then it's 4, and then 8.
That's the
and
thing,
so
is
on.
there's a rule to it, and once you know the
Yes.
rule, you can just complete it flawlessly.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it's just an exercise in repetition.
Well, the
And
fact that it's
there's
1023 moves is a bit of a
Yes.
giveaway.
Yeah.
and it's played like it's there's strategy to it, and there's the opportunity. Yes, there are opportunities to make mistakes, but only if you don't follow the really simple rule that you can learn. And the Doctor's clearly familiar with the game, therefore, as long as he just does that over and over and over again,
Yeah,
then he will succeed. This harks back to one of the big problems that I have overall with this story, is that it's about games and puzzles, and at no point is the viewer let in on the concept of the games or the possibility of solving them or any sense of satisfaction in their solution. So it's deeply unrewarding throughout. The trilogic game's a great example because it's technically it is explained to us, but you don't really get a feel of the point of it or why there's any jeopardy. And certainly if you know that there is a rule to it, then you know that there is no jeopardy as long as you just do the thing. But this also carries over to the riddles, which are insoluble, bewildering.
It's Dusty Bin, isn't it, from 3, 2, 1, more or less.
It's so unsatisfactory. They're so unclear. The servants without voice, I still don't know what that means. Because, okay, yes, Stephen and Dodo have a voice. The servants don't have a voice. But the people in question are ballerinas. They're not servants. So is this an overhang from the George and Margaret version of the story? Did they have servants in the house, in the doll's house? They had a cook. Did they have servants? Were they involved in the chair game? Because I don't understand why the servants without voice component of the riddle is delivered ahead of the chair game, and it has nothing to do with the chair game, unless we're meant to think that the dolls they throw on the chairs are the servants without voice, which doesn't seem right, because when they use this component of the riddle about calling them, the ballerinas respond.
Yeah.
And the added weirdness is that before they've solved this riddle, which doesn't make any sense, the Toymaker pops up and gives them another riddle about the dancing floor, and they haven't even solved the previous riddle, because then they go back. The Toymaker pops up and says, here's the next riddle, and then they park that, and then they go back and they say, well, we'll just finish the previous riddle, because we don't know what. It's just all so jumbled and unsatisfying. And when you get the supposed answers, you don't. There's no sense of triumph. There's no sense of satisfaction. One of the cardinal sins of any TV script is if it doesn't allow the audience to feel clever. And if you present a thing and the audience gets there just a fraction ahead of the characters, you feel great. You feel rewarded.
Yes.
If after the characters have told you the solution, you still don't know what they're talking about, you just get further and further detached from what you're watching, and it's no fun at all. And going back to the chair game and that doctor's line, what is the doctor recognizing? The doctor says, "Oh, it's that bloody chair game again."
Yeah.
Oh, I know the old chair game.
Yeah, it's
Don't
absurd.
you sit on chair number...
Right.
So what is he recognizing? Because we know that the only time he's been to the Toymaker's domain before, he didn't hang around. He did an about face and left. So he's played no game. So he's not recognizing the chair game from the Toymaker's world. Apparently, the deadly chair game is a trope in the Doctor's and the Toymaker's shared history that humans are not privy to. And again, it's alienating. No pun intended. Anything that makes the audience feel, I don't know what's going on, I don't care. It's just another step away from being invested, feeling like you're part of the adventure, getting through to the final challenge. And every stage of this wretched script is another barrier to me caring, being involved, knowing what's going on. How do they get out of this? Who cares? Is it over yet? Please, goodbye.
I think the one that irritates me most is the fact they set up the Trilogic game and then the Toymaker keeps on winding it forward by it's just
make it easier.
and it just happens so many times.
I wanted to bring that up because I had a revelation just this last time, which actually gave me a totally different perspective on that. If there is this pattern, as we've established that there is to the Trilogic game, the only way that the Toymaker could make the Doctor theoretically lose is to push the moves ahead in such a way that he loses his place.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, that's all I can think of, because I used to feel exactly the same way. Why is he pushing it on? He's just like helping him out. And it just occurred to me that, well, if him going ahead 52 moves makes him then misremember where he is in the sequence and make the wrong move, then the Doctor is stewed.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I
I think you're onto something with the distraction, because fundamentally, if you get distracted, you could put the token in the wrong place and then it's irretrievable. But I think a visual assessment of the board, you would immediately see where you were up to and what you needed to do next. I think
I'm not saying it would always work out, but I think that's the Toymaker's best chance, assuming the Doctor is as brilliant as we all know he is. He's going to get that pattern right, even though he says, "Oh, I think I remember the rules of this game." He's going to get it right, and so if the Toymaker shoves him ahead, maybe he'll trip up.
And it goes back to that what I was just saying about knowing what's going on and whether you're invested and care and understand. Because knowing a little bit more about the Trilogic game that I now do, that I didn't used to, I'm less invested in the Trilogic game. Now I know it's more pointless, if you like. But that casts a worse light on the setup as it was originally on screen, because that means it relies on the audience not fully understanding how the Trilogic game works. Because otherwise you would ridicule it and you would say, well, this is not a test of skill and the intellectual mind. This is just a repetitious pattern that anyone can learn. So by virtue of the fact that it set us up with a puzzle that it hopes you don't know anything about, the kind of the detachment is sort of required, and that's no way to get the audience invested. You know, it's like any heist movie. You show a flash forward of the heist going well, so the audience knows exactly what should happen for victory to occur, and then things can go wrong. But if you set up a game that relies on the audience not knowing how it works, how you win, or what you're looking at, and then you're expected to find that tense. It's just balmy.
Because Toymaker has his line about, oh, well, not long now, and then we'll find out whether you've got it right. It's the only...
He might as well have just been counting to 1,000,000.
Yeah, frankly.
Yeah.
We'll tell you later whether you missed 727,422. I'll tell you when you get to 1,000,000. If you forgot one.
I think we need to kind of wrap this up, or we will be talking all night.
Fair.
Are there sort of, some final observations that people want to make about this?
I like everything about it except watching it. I really get nothing from the... I'm sorry, Kieran, if you're listening to this. I really hate this story.
You're a fan.
Absolutely.
Kieran's a fan, is he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I don't mean to name and shame these people, but
No shame at all. No shame.
there are those that I just find it very frustrating. I think that all of the problems that it went through really show, and we've talked countless times about stories that don't make a lot of sense and are still great. This doesn't make any sense and is not great. One of many consequences of the rewrite. We talked briefly about George and Margaret, who were the original pair of companion characters to Steve and Dodo, maybe the Doctor as well. They start out friendly, they get more and more sinister as the episodes progress, as the games progress, and that gave the whole serial a through line, and you had characters with an arc story who developed. They got more unsettling and weirder until they finally betrayed Stephen and Dodo, and Stephen and Dodo defeat them at the last minute. And that sounds pretty interesting and a good payoff. And because of this rewrite, we get none of that. We get pairs of disposable characters who are, I think, badly written, tedious dialogue, witless dialogue, childish, nonsensical remarks, and you get pairs of them, and they come and go, and they come and go, and they come and go, and consequently you're introduced to new people that you don't care about, you don't know where they've come from, and then they go, and then they're replaced, and they're replaced, and they're replaced. And so there's no sense of continuity, there's no through line in that regard. The riddles don't make sense, the games don't make sense, nothing about this comes together by the end, and I think it's a really disastrous production with very few redeeming features. So sorry, everyone who likes it. I hate it.
How dare you?
Love the animation though. Great.
Yeah.
Well done. Animation with the sound off. Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think there's nothing that can't be solved about this without a page one rewrite, really. Again, I'd echo, love the animation. I just wanted to particularly, because I don't think we mentioned it, but give a shout out for the character design and the ingenuity of coming up with the different ways of treating the various pairs of characters, adversaries.
Stop motion Heart Family.
Yeah.
What a
unbelievable. Yeah.
Genius.
Absolute.
And Rug
Genius.
with his helmets down over his head, the knitted clowns,
Yes. Beautiful.
tin
Absolutely
plates, tin plate Cyril. Very clever.
It's funny, on the subject of the playing card, the Hart family, that dialogue now makes more sense. When she says, don't you see who they are? They're playing cards.
Absolutely.
That makes more sense now than it ever did.
Absolutely.
Because, you can look at the costumes and you kind of get there. But it's not a dead obvious realization when you look at them. They're just kind of slightly over-designed royal costumes with the suits motif. But Dodo's realization is just really, really gratifying with the animation, the very literal animation.
At the same time, it also spoils her later line where the Queen of Hearts offers the King of Hearts to say, feel his arm.
Oh, feel his arm.
You see,
yes,
real arm. It's not a real arm anymore if it's a playing card. So there's trade-offs there. You're totally right about the playing cards looking like playing cards. I thought that was brilliant. But it ruins other things.
Yeah. Which brings me on to, I know we're trying to wrap up, but something that bugs me, one of the 27 things that bugs me.
Okay.
There's no consistency in where these characters come from, what is their nature and what is their fate. And I don't know if that's a consequence of the rewrites. We know from the ghosts of the old scripts that it said originally that George and Margaret were real people and that they became trapped and like toys in the Toymaker's realm. But it's muddier with the Hart family because they're very keen to claim that they're real people, as you say, Jess. But the Toymaker's attitude towards it, and to Wiggs and Rugg, he basically says, I'll just consign you to some form of death if you don't do as I say. And when he's taking them out of the doll's house, he says, these are playing cards. He doesn't. I can't articulate myself very well, but I don't know whether these are real people turned to toys or whether these are toys brought to life. And it seems that both are mentioned at different times. And again, it's about, you don't really understand what the stakes are. The Toymaker says that Stephen and Dodo can be therefore consigned to be his playthings forever, like the clowns.
Yeah.
So the clowns aren't toys that are brought to life, even though there's a whole conversation later where Dodo does a little Toy Story thought to herself about how it turns out toys have a life of their own and can come to life. So maybe we should treat our toys with more respect because they're living things, which is the opposite. It's just an incongruity that, again, is another barrier to me getting anything out of this because I don't know what the rules are of this mad universe and I don't know what's at stake. I hate it. Get rid of it. Can you lose episode 4 as well, please?
Jess, any final thoughts from you?
One of the reasons that I've always loved Doctor Who is that no matter how far-fetched the stories, how crazy the characters or the aliens or what have you, there's always a foundation of not necessarily science, but plausibility. That is something that's always attracted me to the show. This is like a slap in the face to that. And I don't necessarily mean that like I'm mad about it. But imagine how far, we're 2.5 seasons through this formerly educational, now these adventure stories, which go all these different places. And as wild as they are, it's much easier to dive into the reality of the story and sort of accept it and go with it. This is so jarringly not that. It's so fantastical that I've always it's never, hit me right. And then, it also has its writing problems, which we've talked about, which makes it really, tedious and inconsistent. And it's too bad. It's not that it couldn't have worked out, and as we'll talk with the Giggle, maybe we see a version of it where it can work out in a way. Some of these ideas are explored again in the Giggle. But, when you have this concession to fantasy, and then, of course, the solution to all that fantasy is for the Doctor to make a perfect impersonation of Michael Gough. And they hit the TARDIS, dematerialization at the right moment. And I'm like, okay, I can't wait for next week.
I can't wait for next week. It's the Gunfighters.
Well,
I'm only saying that to Wayne Gav. As you know, I'm waiting both of you up, aren't I?
I used to feel very similarly about the Gunfighters. Not anymore.
I don't know if this is the right moment, but there's something in that where defeating a godlike entity with a very technical solution, as we've just had the season finale with Sutek. It's an interesting parallel. But also what's odd is that Sutek in the new series was bigged up as the god of all gods, whereas in Pyramids of Mars, he was explicitly not a god. He's just an alien. He's a powerful alien.
Yeah.
So of all of the godlike entities mentioned in Doctor Who, Sutek's definitely not a god, whereas the Toymaker clearly has powers beyond any universe that we recognise, and probably the gods of Ragnarok and umpteen other things fall into that category. I think Sutek doesn't. If Sutek can be defeated by the speed of radio signal and then banished down a time tunnel, then he's constrained by all the normal physical laws of our universe, which
I'm putting that down to all that exposure to the vortex. That's my headcanon. How he turned into a proper god.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, but as you say, the end of the Celestial Toymaker is such a technical, fiddly, electronic solution to defeating an entity which has complete physical control over every aspect of his environment. Like Omega, there's another godlike entity that I think is seemingly able to do magic more than Sutek could. But yeah, the defeat of the Toymaker again is another incongruity. It's a story of ideas butting up against each other, none of which nicely mesh together.
I've realised the thing that actually, when I said I'd had a revelation earlier about why I don't like it, I just don't like this genre of story where you have some godlike entity who just sets a bunch of random challenges. And I realise it kind of reminds me of some classic Star Trek kind of stories more than really belonging in the Doctor Who genre to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like the adventure game, but not as good as well. I guess, my final thoughts on the Celestial Toymaker is that actually, for all its faults, I quite enjoyed it. I particularly quite enjoyed for different reasons. I enjoyed the animation because it was so eye-catching, and I enjoyed the reconstructions because they actually took me back to the original story and understood with some of the context from the animation. I sort of understood what was going on a bit better, and I quite liked that. One tiny thing that I liked in episode 4, you can see Peter Purves is doing a bit of sort of extra acting where he's sort of counting under his breath to see where Cyril's going to land and sort of reacting to that. And I mean, it's a tiny little thing, but I just thought it was nice, and I liked it. And I think on the whole, I like Peter Purves. I mean, for all that I talked earlier about how his character seems a bit odd in several places, I think he's a great strength to whatever is good about this story, that he's giving it, his best. And I just liked that one moment. I thought, yeah, he's, regardless of the fact that there's an old bloke dressed up as a schoolboy, why it couldn't be an actual schoolboy, I don't know. It sort of would have made a lot more sense to me. Despite the fact that they're playing a stupid game with an old bloke dressed up as a schoolboy, he's still trying his hardest to make this work for everybody. And that at least sort of gave me a warm feeling. So look, there's our thoughts on the Celestial Toymaker, and we'll be back soon with some thoughts about the Giggle.
See you soon.
Cheapest episode ever made, apparently. £1,449, episode 4 of the Celestial Toymaker. Doctor Who never got cheaper than that.
Well, yes.
Comment.
That's not why I call you Colonial.
Isn't it?
No, it's because you're full of poo.
Should be colonic, shouldn't it? But never mind. I mean, it's close enough.
Quite.
Within the bounds of humour, it'll work.